Plant protein may prove a more effective diabetic defense study. Consuming protein from plants rather than from meat greatly reduces chances of type 2 diabetes. New research shows. Results from a 19-year study show that those consuming diets rich in vegetable proteins have reduced levels of type 2 diabetes compared to those consuming similar protein quantities from meat. This is the first long-term research indicating the benefits of replacing meat-based protein sources with plants, and to find that meat protein itself is not a diabetes risk factor, other compounds within meats and the spread of diabetes. Those consuming the highest quantities of plant-based protein had a 35% lower risk of type 2 diabetes onset than those consuming the lowest quantities. Using mathematical modeling, researchers estimated that by replacing just 5 grams of meat-based protein per day with vegetable substitutes, the overall risk could decrease by 18%. Researchers also determined that the overall consumption of protein has no direct link with type 2 diabetes and that other substances within meat and fish, particularly processed white meat and unprocessed red meat, are attributable to type 2 diabetes risks. Higher consumption of plants, particularly grains and potatoes and eggs, contributed to lower levels of the disease by omitting other compounds found in meats from the diet. With it, there exists a wealth of research linking high meat consumption, particularly red meats, with diabetes and cardiovascular diabetes diseases. There is less understanding of how different sources of the proteins vary in associated risks. As stated in the report, the tales or the roles of different dietary proteins in the etiology of type 2 diabetes remains unclear. In a 2011, a study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed an 100-gram daily serving of red meat could increase risk of type 2 diabetes by 19%. The chances were found to be to more than double when meat was processed. The COPIO ischemic heart disease study, an ongoing research project at the University of Eastern Finland, began examining participants in 1984. All participants were male, aged between 42 and 60 at the time of the project's launch, and none had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. 19 years later, 432 of the original 2,332 participants were suffering from the disease. Researchers used dietary records, questionnaires, blood glucose measurements, and oral glucose measurements to determine diabetes risk. The findings showed that replacing 1% of total energy intake from animal protein with plant protein was associated with 18% decreased risk for type 2 diabetes. This association remained after results were adjusted for the varying body mass index of participants. Another finding was that replacing 1% of energy from carbohydrates with energy from protein was associated with 5% increased risk of type 2 diabetes, but this association collapsed after adjusting the results for varying fiber intake. The results were published in the British Journal of Nutrition.